All right, well, thanks very much. I'll get right to it because I know these are short talks. So it turns out that urban planners, architects, designers, and most social scientists agree that one of the icons of 20th century modernism, the American suburb, is extremely flawed and is no longer sustainable. What most academics don't know, however, is that this model was exported and is being reproduced across the planet on every continent, especially in Latin America, our closest neighbors. So that is the subject of the book that I recently wrote, Global Suburbs. And I'd like to try to tell you the story about that phenomenon in an abbreviated version today. So I begin by defining what a suburb is, and this is important because later I'm going to point out something that's happened as it's been exported, which is that the exact physical form of the American suburb has not necessarily been copied, but something else has, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the American suburb, the second half of the 20th century, was the main way that cities were being designed by architects and urban planners, and it consisted of the things that are listed here. It was a low-density, automobile-oriented. It had a road hierarchy consisting mainly of freeways and secondary collectors that all fed into, made the whole system work throughout the region. It's usually on the outskirts of cities, and very important, it consists of something called single-use zoning, and that's a big problem. Separating all the different activities in a city into separate areas. Shopping centers, commerce, residential areas, office space, factories, and that means that every time someone uses a different land use, they have to travel to dispersed locations, which is part of the reason it's no longer sustainable. So, many ecological problems associated with urban sprawl. The literature and suburbs is quite voluminous. The biggest problem, of course, is the physical form of the suburb and the fact that one has to move by the automobile mainly, which is no longer sustainable as we know it today. But there are other problems that I highlight in the book, including air pollution, traffic accidents, the problem of obesity, and what we call the decline of social capital. I won't spend a lot of time on these, but studies have shown that freeways that serve the suburbs actually produce much higher concentrations of toxic air. Traffic accidents occur not only on freeways, but in the roads leading off the freeways onto strip developments in suburban areas, much higher traffic rates. The biggest study ever done in the 1990s by a massive number of researchers showed that people who live in suburbs have much higher rates of obesity because they don't walk anywhere. They don't get enough exercise in their daily life, and this leads to all sorts of physical problems, all sorts of medical problems. And finally, this is a slightly more complicated thing, but this book, Bowling Alone, is a metaphor for a lot of literature that talks about the social problems of suburbs, people being isolated, the lack of interaction, the lack of social institutions, the decline of social institutions, and all of the implications of that. So this is the pattern that's been mapped out by academics and scholars over the last 30 years. Now, why do I call it a global suburb? Precisely because of what I mentioned before. The fact that this model, which we now understand to be flawed, over the last 30 or 40 years, lots of other countries in the world like the idea of a suburb. And so they've decided to build their cities using the suburban model. And there are different names for these suburbs around the world. In Spanish, they're called barrios privados in Argentina. They have other names throughout Latin America, which I'll mention in a little bit. Security villages in South Africa. And even the names of U.S. places are recreated in other parts of the world. So there's a suburb outside of Cairo, Egypt called Beverly Hills, and there's one outside of Beijing called Orange County, and one outside of Hong Kong called Palm Springs. So they love our suburbs so much that they actually take the names of those places. They also use English in the naming of shopping malls around the world in the suburbs, and especially in Brazil where I've worked. Now this is a critical point in my book. If you look at the actual physical structure of suburbs around the world, they don't necessarily look like American suburbs. They're not as low density as our suburbs. But what they've copied, I argue, is what I call the sociocultural narrative of our suburbs. And that is the things about the suburbs, the things that they think suburbs will create, that I've listed here. Everything from privacy, social exclusivity, the perception that they're safer, whether or not that's actually true. There's a fear of crime and the architecture of what some scholars have called social policing. A preference actually for things that look the same, like shopping malls and prototypical design models for housing that are cookie-cutter residential type designs that are used around the world, and an emphasis on consumerism and shopping malls, which we see again and again across the planet. Now, I'm especially interested in Latin America. I've spent most of my career working along the border and also in Mexico and Latin America. And so in Latin America, we find two very specific kinds of developments occurring. One is these gated communities, these gated suburbs, similar to what we have across the United States, that are spreading out into outer-lying areas that used to look a lot different. If you've ever been to Tijuana, you know that the pattern normally that we think of outside of cities are these very low-income, what we call squatter settlements or colonias in Mexico, or asentamientos irregulares, irregular settlements in other parts of Latin America. There's also a lot of these mega projects, these giant sort of new towns that are being built, often very high-density places like this one in Mexico City called Santa Fe, which is one of the best examples of this kind of mega project that's a sort of combination of offices, mega malls, high-rise condominiums. Okay, this is the old periphery of Latin American cities that we're more familiar with, and this is the new periphery, the gated residential suburbs. One scholars refer to it as archipelagos because they're spread out on the outskirts of cities, and they have everything from very posh, high-end, single-family houses to high-rise luxury towers and condominiums. In Brazil, where I've been working a lot, they talk about the condominio fechado, the closed condominium, because it's very protected. And then, of course, these mega shopping malls as well. Now, why did they copy the US suburb? Well, in my book, I studied especially Mexico and Brazil, and what I found was that the American suburb was a symbol of modernity. It was the image of freedom, democracy, security, the supermarket, the family car, the leave it to beaver, if you will, image of a very safe place to raise your family. And that was sold, that was marketed very carefully by investors in the 1960s and 70s and 80s across Latin America. And so in Mexico, I talk about three different phenomena that are occurring on the periphery of the cities. The mega projects that I mentioned before, Walmartization. Mexico has, I think, the largest number of Walmarts outside the United States on the planet, and the suburbs for the masses, which is a more recent phenomenon in the 1990s. So this is the mega projects that I talked about. Santa Fe is probably the quintessential example. Investment of a lot of large corporations, high-end residential. They wiped out all the low-income squatter settlements and moved them elsewhere so they could build this high-end suburb. It's very fortified, it's mostly high-rise, highly privatized, an obsession with security. It doesn't work very well, there's nowhere to walk. So it fails as an urban design prototype. The Walmart phenomena, there's over 1,000 in Mexico as well. And in the 1990s, they started building these mass suburbs across Mexico. Big problem is that they built millions of these suburban houses, and now they're being abandoned because they're so isolated. And Tijuana's a good example. Apparently, they built about several 100,000, and a third of them are already isolated and being abandoned. Okay, so in Brazil, we find the same phenomenon, these vertical suburbs, highly privatized, lots of monitoring. I did a case study of Rio, and down here was the new suburb of Rio because they ran out of land. You can see all the green is all the mountainous parts of Rio, and this is what it looks like. Lots of problems there as well, traffic congestion, environmental degradation of the coastline, especially these lagoon ecosystems and coastal sand dunes that are being massively destroyed by these high-rise, high-density developments. So what does the global suburb mean? It's a political power struggle now for control of these highly coveted peripheral regions. In Mexico, the government went into a private partnership with developers to build these suburban houses, and it failed because they didn't provide hospitals, schools, places to shop. People are very isolated. Crime rates are going up in those suburbs. Same thing in Brazil. People are upset about those suburbs that they're building there because they're only for rich people, and there's a lot of problems. These models are not sustainable. And finally, I talk about how can we change this? What are the alternatives? And I won't have time to go into this, but I think it comes down to different scales: the region, the city, the neighborhood, and individuals, and how we think about the connection between a community and its ecosystem. We call this a bioregion. You can map, you can grow food, you can start to figure out better ways of designing places for people to live. You can slow down, you can have traffic calming, you can restore the ecology of the ecosystem. You can do all these things, and finally you can make neighborhoods themselves, people more connected to their own communities and participating in their communities in ways that are different from traditional suburbs. Thank you very much.
Questions?
Forgot about the question part. I was going so fast. Okay.
Hi, Walt Hochel. Without disagreeing with anything you said, I would just add that we have to think about population growth. And a lot of this is driven by no population planning, no population vision, or very little. And we're going to have problems, whatever models we use. And a lot of the problems you point out are due to the expanding population. And we can put them here or we can put them there. But I think most ecologists feel that we're way above carrying capacity at 7 billion people.
I don't disagree. Do I get to respond? Or? Okay. I don't know how this works. It's called Discovery Slam. So does that mean you slam the person who just spoke without them responding? Yeah, so that's a great point. The only thing I would say is whether or not you have more people, the kind of habitat you build for them to live in, there are very different types of models. And what we need is a model where people, first of all, where people can walk to things and not always be using machines and energy. And second of all, where they really feel connected to the ecosystem, where they actually care about their environment, rather than living in a kind of artificial suburb with shopping malls that cut you off from the environment in a sort of Las Vegas-like way. We need to design buildings and spaces and communities where people feel connected to their ecosystem.
Again, I don't disagree with that, but with 1 billion people every 13 years being added, I think whatever model we use is going to be a disaster if we don't do something about the population.
Oh, okay. I have a question related to the traffic. Do you mention anywhere public transportation, like a system of trains that connects these suburbs to the like the city center? Or because I might have missed it from your talk, but there was no mention of that. I mean, that's what makes Europe, because you don't need to have your car. You just go on the train and you arrive in the city center with your bike, a folding bike. I mean, that's something that I think needs to be addressed in a car-oriented society.
Right. The number one alternative transit that could save the world is called bus rapid transit, BRT. It's for some reason not being adapted in the US. We've taken on this more rail transit system like we have here in San Diego, the trolley. So much more expensive per mile to build these light rail systems than it is to have bus systems. You don't need rights of way. You can do a lot of things with bus rapid transit. And it's slowly being looked at in the United States, but for some reason politicians like to leave behind a memorial of themselves, so they want to build these light rail transit systems. And there's a lot of debate going on about that, but that's a very important point, is how are you going to move people around in the future?
Larry, thank you. Very interesting. My question is there anything unique culturally, for example, about Latin America where this model has taken root compared to, say, Asia or Africa? I think we know why it happened in the U.S., but is there something about Latin America that particularly lends itself to this kind of copying or whatever it is?
No, that's a great question. It's a question that I ponder in certain places in my book, and how are the developments in Latin? I have actually had some people who are from Latin America challenge me and say, well, even though we are doing what you said, we're doing it in our own unique way. So I do agree with you. I would say that there are a couple of things. Well, for one, I think Brazilians, in Brazil, for example, they tried to recreate at first the urbanism of the existing city and make higher density places where you could actually walk to things. But once the developers got their hands on land and it was highly, the market was very powerful, they forgot about that. And they started building much more impersonal buildings that have no identity. So there's the newer suburbs are really, really placeless, whereas the original ones were more like a Latin American city. There's a joke in Rio, where I've done a lot of work, to say that Rio is famous for having these street corner cafes that are very popular. And they said that there are no street corner cafes in the new suburbs because there are no street corners, because everything's set back from the street and surrounded by parking lots. So botequim is the word in Portuguese for this street corner cafe. So anyway, but that's a great question that I think is really worth considering down the road.
So I guess I wonder what you consider sustainable. I've lived in areas where you could walk to places, but those are usually little mom and pop shops, and they can't compete with the likes of Walmart. And when you really want to buy anything, you're going to drive to Walmart anyway. I don't see that your criticism is... maybe it's Walt's statement that no matter what you do, it's going to fall apart. But I guess I'd like to hear your response to that anyway.
Well, you can have Walmart's. One of the problems is that Walmart imagines that eventually it's going to basically eliminate all other commerce, and they'll have these things called super centers or supersonic Walmart centers that will be their own. Yeah. So I think the point is, and the city of San Diego, for example, is trying to limit the size of large commercial spaces to under 200,000 square feet because Walmart wants to exceed that. So I think if you can control those, there is still a place for walkable urbanism. Look what's happening all over the United States. Portland, Seattle, people are moving back into cities. They're walking to shops and stores. They like that. They still drive their car every once in a while, and they pick up the things that they want at the larger commercial centers. But their daily life can involve. You can have medium-sized supermarkets in downtowns. It's happening in downtown San Diego. Downtown San Diego had 12,000 people 20 years ago. In another 15 or 20 years, it's going to have 100,000. The population is quadrupling in downtown. People want to live at higher densities, and you have all these sharing economy things that allow you don't even need a car. You have Uber. You can get around in other ways, and we're building a transit system here, hopefully in the future. And we have climate action plans. I didn't mention that one of the things that happened after suburbs, the critique of suburbs has created a whole movement. It's called smart growth, the new urbanism, and now we have climate action change plans across every city in the United States, and San Diego has one of the most innovative ones. And the purpose of that, if you look at you go online to the city of San Diego and look at their climate action change plan, they're actually saying they're going to change the percentage of people that use cars over the next 20 to 30 years. They have a lot of goals in that climate action plan that is really about more compact urbanism, people finding other ways to live on a daily basis in the city. So I respect your cynicism, but I would urge you to look at what's going on across the country. Young people are saying, we don't need cars. We're going to move downtown. We want to participate in the sharing economy. We want to be part of a future that's more sustainable. Okay? Slightly ironic given what's going on politically in the country right now, but nevertheless, also look how many people came out on the streets to show solidarity. So there is something happening in the world and in this country. It's kind of the alternative, and it's the future, I would say.
Thank you very much,
Yes,
Larry.
thank you.